She was drugged, thrown into the snow, and left to freeze like she never mattered. The cold was already winning when a monster with glowing eyes found her. He was not mercy. He was fate. And saving her would start a war no pack could stop. Welcome back, packmates, and don't forget to subscribe for more intense werewolf stories. Now let's dive in. The floorboards groaned 3 seconds before Marcus kicked the door open. Ivy's hands stilled over the threadbare blanket she'd been mending by candlelight. 3 years in this attic had taught her to read the house's warnings. The particular creak of the 8th stair when someone climbed drunk. The rattle of the door handle that meant rage instead of Elena's cold, controlled visits. Tonight was different. Tonight, the entire frame shuddered. Where is she? Marcus's voice carved through the darkness below, thick with whiskey and something darker. Something that made Ivy's pulse hammer against her throat. Elena's response was too quiet to hear, but Ivy knew that tone. Soothing. Placating. The same voice she'd used when father was dying, when she'd promised to care for his daughter, when she'd smiled at the funeral and locked Ivy away 3 days later. Ivy blew out the candle. Darkness was safer. The argument escalated. Glass shattering, Elena's sharp cry, then silence. The kind of silence that pressed against eardrums and made breathing feel like theft. Ivy curled into the corner where the roof sloped lowest, making herself small. Invisible. She'd perfected invisible. Footsteps on the stairs. Not stumbling. Purposeful. The lock clicked. Ivy's heart stopped, but it was Elena who entered, carrying a clay cup that steamed in the February cold. Her stepmother's face was perfectly composed, not a hair displaced from its severe bun, though a red mark bloomed across her left cheek. Drink this. Elena set the cup on the floor between them. It will help you sleep through the noise. Ivy stared at the cup, at Elena, at the door left deliberately open behind her. I'm not thirsty. Drink. Something in Elena's eyes made Ivy's skin prickle. Not anger. Elena's anger was ice, calculated and clean. This was something else. Something that looked almost like relief. Ivy's fingers trembled as she lifted the cup. The liquid was warm, herb-scented, familiar. The same tea Elena had given her every night for the past week. Her throat was so dry it ached. When had she last had anything to drink? Yesterday morning? The day before? She drank. Elena watched every swallow, and when the cup was empty, she smiled. You were always your father's mistake. The words took a moment to land, and by then, Ivy's vision was already blurring. The cup slipped from her fingers, rolling across warped wood. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't obey. The attic tilted, and Elena's face swam above her, sharp and clear and utterly without remorse. What did you... Darkness swallowed the rest. When consciousness flickered back, the world was moving, rocking. Freezing wind bit through thin cotton, and Ivy realized she was lying in the bed of a truck, her nightgown soaked through with snow. The sky above was starless, choked with storm clouds that promised more cold, more burial. She tried to move. Her limbs were lead. The truck stopped. Voices, low, male, unfamiliar. Rough hands grabbed her arms, her legs, and then she was falling, hitting frozen ground so hard her teeth clacked together. Through failing vision, she saw the truck's taillights disappear down the mountain road. Snow began to fall. Ivy tried to crawl, managed 3 feet before her arms gave out. The cold was a living thing now, burrowing into her bones, slowing her blood. Her lips had gone numb. Her fingers were white, then blue. Strange how the body announced its own death in colors. She should be terrified, should be fighting. But as the snow covered her like a shroud, Ivy felt something unexpected. Peace. At least the cold didn't hate her, didn't lock her away or forget to bring food for days, didn't smile while poisoning her tea or sell her death to strangers. The cold was honest, clean. It would take her, and then the small, terrible life of Ivy Thorne would simply end. And perhaps that was Mercy. Her eyes drifted closed. "Father, I'm sorry I couldn't be worth saving." The wind howled, except it wasn't wind. The sound started low, built into something primal, something that vibrated in the chest and raised hair on the back of the neck. Ancient, commanding. A howl that said apex predator, that said run, that said bow. Ivy's eyes cracked open. Through the curtain of falling snow, something moved. Massive. Dark. Eyes that glowed amber in the darkness, reflecting what little light the storm allowed. The shape resolved into something impossible. A wolf. But far too large. Its shoulder higher than any horse Ivy had seen. Steam rose from its fur as snow melted on contact. The creature stopped 3 feet away. Ivy waited for teeth. For the quick death predators offered. She almost welcomed it. Instead, the wolf lowered its enormous head, and those amber eyes met hers with an intelligence that froze her dying thoughts mid-prayer. The creature's nose touched her forehead, impossibly warm, and Ivy felt something crack open in her chest. Not pain, recognition. The wolf's lips pulled back, and for one terrible moment, Ivy thought she'd been wrong about Mercy. Then it threw back its head and howled again, the sound splitting the night like a summons, like a vow, like the ending of one world and the violent birth of another. Massive paws crunched through snow, coming closer, then darkness took her completely. Theron had felt it 3 miles out. A pull beneath his ribs that had nothing to do with the blizzard, or the moon phase, or any rational thing he could name. 5 years of exile had taught him to trust his instincts, even when they made no sense, especially when they made no sense. So he'd shifted and run toward human territory despite every logical reason not to. Now he understood why. The girl was dying. Minutes away, maybe less. Her lips were gray, her skin waxen, and frost had begun to crystallize in her dark hair. But it was the smell that hit him hardest. Fear and despair so thick it coated his tongue, mixed with something else. Something that made his wolf surge forward with a possessiveness that should have been impossible. She wasn't pack, wasn't wolf, was nothing to him, except she was everything, and he didn't understand why, and that made him bare his teeth at the empty night. Theron shifted back to human form, the cold meaningless against his skin. He knelt and gathered her into his arms, and the rage that tore through him was white-hot and biblical. Someone had done this, had stripped her down to a nightgown thinner than cobwebs and left her to freeze like unwanted trash, had looked at this fragile thing and decided she was disposable. His growl rumbled low enough to shake snow from nearby pines. The girl didn't stir. Her heartbeat was faint, irregular, failing. Theron pulled her against his chest and ran, his bare feet finding purchase on ice and stone that would have broken human bones. The manor was 2 miles north, carved into the mountain's face where no sane person would venture. Where the strange alpha lived alone, except for the 3 wolves who'd chosen exile over abandoning him. Where he should have stayed tonight instead of following an inexplicable pull into human lands. The manor's doors opened at his approach, responding to the alpha command in his blood. Heat rushed out to meet him, flames roaring higher in the great hearth, as if the house itself recognized emergency. Theron laid the girl on fur rugs before the fire, and his hands, scarred from battles he'd rather forget, were steady as he checked her pulse, her breathing, the dangerous coldness of her extremities. Dying. Still dying. He should warm her slowly, carefully, following the protocols for severe hypothermia. Should wrap her in blankets and wait for her core temperature to rise degree by painful degree. Should save her life and then send her back to whatever human world had thrown her away. Should. But as firelight played across her face, illuminating features too delicate for the cruelty she'd endured, Theron felt something ancient uncoil in his chest. The mate bond. Impossible. She was human. Unwanted. He'd sworn never to bind himself to another after what he'd lost. Undeniable. because his wolf was howling mine with a certainty that obliterated 5 years of careful solitude. No. The word cracked in the empty hall. Not this. Not her. The girl's breathing hitched, faltered, Theron's hands fisted in the fur beneath her. He could let her go. Could save her life and send her away and never know what this unbearable pull meant. Could stay alone in his fortress, safe from the devastation that came with caring. Her heart skipped a beat. Then another. His choice dissolved like snow in flame. Theron gathered the girl closer, cradling her against his chest as he began to speak, words he'd never thought he'd say again. The old tongue, the language of first wolves, syllables that tasted of iron and earth and binding magic. The claiming ritual required alpha blood, consciousness from both parties, witnesses from the pack. He had none of those things except his blood. He bit his own palm, pressed the wound to her cold lips, and spoke the words anyway. By blood I claim you. By breath I bind you. By my name I shield you from death and darkness. Theron held her through the transformation, through the moments where the bond settled into their bones and rewrote what they were. When her eyes finally fluttered open, they were the color of storm clouds, and for a heartbeat, he saw his own shock reflected there. Then confusion. Then fear. Easy. His voice came out rougher than intended. You're safe. She stared at him, at his scars, at his amber eyes that marked him as other, at the impossibility of his existence. Her lips moved soundlessly. Where? What? My home. My territory. Theron forced himself to loosen his grip, though his wolf snarled at the distance. You were dying. I should be dead. Her voice was barely a whisper, scraped raw. Yes. He held her gaze, let her see the truth in his eyes, the weight of what he'd done. But I'm selfish. And you're safe now. You're mine. The words came out harder than he meant them, edged with possessiveness he couldn't quite contain. And no one will ever throw you away again. The man's words hung in the air like a brand. You're mine. And Ivy's mind fractured trying to process them. She should run, should scream, should do anything except lie here in front of a fire that burned without wood, wrapped in furs that smelled of pine and something wild, staring at a stranger whose eyes reflected light like an animal's. I don't understand. Her voice cracked. Any of this. Theron stood, putting distance between them so quickly it made her flinch. He moved to the window, his bare back a map of scars that looked like claw marks, like he'd been torn apart and sewn back together wrong. When he spoke, he didn't turn around. You were left to die. I found you. I claimed you as my mate to bind your life to mine. It was the only way to save you. His shoulders tensed. The bond is permanent. You're Luna now. My Luna. Luna. Mate. Bond. The words meant nothing and everything. Foreign syllables that still burrowed under her skin like they'd been waiting there all along. I don't know what those words mean. They mean you're no longer human. Not entirely. Now he did turn, and his amber eyes pinned her in place. They mean you're tied to me, to this territory, to a world you didn't know existed. His jaw worked. They mean I've stolen your choice, and I'd do it again, because watching you die wasn't an option my wolf would accept. Ivy's breath came shallow. The room tilted, and she gripped the fur beneath her fingers, anchoring herself to something solid. You're wolf. I'm werewolf. Alpha of... He stopped, something bitter crossing his face. Alpha of 3. Hardly a pack worth the name. The door opened without anyone touching it. Ivy's scream caught in her throat as 3 massive wolves padded into the hall, their fur dusted with snow. They stopped when they saw her, heads tilting in unison, and the largest, a silver-gray female, made a sound that was almost questioning. She knows. Theron's voice carried command, and all 3 wolves lowered themselves to their bellies. Ivy, meet what remains of my pack. Kira, Ash, and Reed. They won't hurt you." The wolves watched her with two intelligent eyes, and Ivy understood with a clarity that made her dizzy. These weren't animals. These were people wearing wolf skin, and the man standing by the window could do the same, and somehow she was bound to all of it. "I'm going to be sick." She wasn't, but Theron moved anyway, crouching beside her with a wooden bowl of water. "Drink, slowly." The water was cold and clean, and the best thing she'd ever tasted. Ivy drank until the bowl was empty, and only then realized her hands had stopped shaking. Her body felt different, stronger, like something had been poured into her veins that hummed beneath the surface. "What did you do to me?" "Gave you a chance to live." Theron took the bowl back. "The bond shares life force. My strength, my healing. It's yours now. You'll age slower, heal faster, feel things more intensely." His voice dropped. "You'll feel me sometimes, my emotions, my location. It goes both ways." Ivy pressed a hand to her chest, where something new pulsed in rhythm with her heart. A golden thread she could almost see if she closed her eyes, stretching from her core to his. "I didn't ask for this." "No." Theron's expression was granite. "You didn't. And I won't pretend this is a gift. The bond is a chain as much as protection." He stood again, putting distance between them like he couldn't bear proximity. "But you're alive. That's what matters." The next days blurred together in a haze of impossible things. Ivy learned that doors opened at Theron's approach because the manor responded to Alpha Command, that fires burned without fuel because old magic soaked the stones, that her new pack members were exiles who'd followed Theron into isolation, rather than abandon him to whatever crime had gotten him banished. She learned that being Luna meant more than title, meant responsibility for pack welfare, meant learning hierarchies and laws of a world that existed in shadow beside the human one. Theron taught her with brutal efficiency, his manner oscillating between cold instruction and moments of unexpected gentleness when he thought she wasn't looking, like when he brought her tea without being asked, or adjusted the furs around her shoulders when she shivered, or stood guard outside her door at night, even though he insisted the bond was merely practical. But Ivy felt him watching her, caught the way his eyes tracked her movements across rooms, the way his jaw tightened when she laughed at something Kira said in her shifted human form, the way he breathed deeper when she passed close. The mate bond wasn't practical. It was hunger barely leashed. 3 weeks after her claiming, the full moon rose. Ivy stood at the window of her chamber, watching silver light spill across snow, and felt something answer in her blood. A pull. A call. Downstairs, a howl split the night. Theron's voice, but transformed, primal, and the bond yanked tight enough to steal her breath. She ran, found him in the courtyard, mid-shift, his body caught between forms in a grotesque beauty that should have terrified her. Bones cracked and reformed. Skin rippled as fur erupted. The man disappeared, and in his place stood the massive black wolf from the mountain, eyes still burning amber. The bond thrummed. And something deep in Ivy's chest responded. Her vision doubled. Her skin burned. She gasped and fell to her knees, and for one impossible moment, she felt her bones begin to shift. Human. She was human. This wasn't possible. But the wolf padding toward her knew different. And when Theron pressed his muzzle to her forehead, Ivy's dreams that night were full of prophecies written in starlight, and a power that had been sleeping in her blood, waiting for someone to wake it, waiting for him. Ivy woke tangled in sheets damp with sweat, her father's face fading from dreams that felt more like memories. In them, he'd been whispering warnings she couldn't quite hear, his hands pressed to her chest like he was trying to push something deep inside where it couldn't be found. She dressed in the leather training clothes Kira had given her and found Theron already in the courtyard, moving through combat forms that looked like violence choreographed into art. "You're late." He didn't stop moving, didn't look at her. "I didn't know we'd set a time." Dawn. Every day. Now he did stop, turning those amber eyes on her. If you're going to survive in this world, you need to be able to fight. The training was brutal. Theron didn't coddle or soften blows, and Ivy hit the frozen ground so many times she lost count. But each time she fell, she got up faster, hit harder, moved quicker. Her body was remembering things it shouldn't know. How to duck, how to pivot, how to use momentum against superior strength. On the third knockdown, Theron caught her wrist to pull her up, and neither of them let go. His thumb pressed against her pulse point. Her heartbeat hammered against his touch. The bond hummed between them, golden and insistent, and Ivy watched something crack behind his carefully controlled expression. "You're getting stronger." His voice had gone rough. "Faster than you should be." "Is that bad?" "I don't know." He released her wrist like it burned him. "Nothing about you makes sense." That night, Ivy found the journal. She'd been exploring the manor's library, running fingers along leather spines, when a book fell from a high shelf she hadn't touched. It landed open at her feet, and her father's handwriting stared up at her like a ghost. "If you're reading this, Ivy, then I've failed to protect you. Forgive me." Her knees hit stone. She gathered the journal with shaking hands and read by firelight, and with each page, her world reformed into something darker and stranger than even Theron's explanations had prepared her for. Her father had been a guardian, part of an ancient order sworn to protect a bloodline that carried dormant wolf genetics, a legacy that surfaced once every few generations in seemingly human families. Ivy's mother had been one of the bloodline carriers, and she'd passed it to her daughter. A gift. A curse. A power that others would kill to possess or destroy. Elena knows. Her father had written in his final entry, his handwriting deteriorating into desperate scrawl. She's been asking too many questions, watching Ivy too closely. "I've hidden the lineage records, but if something happens to me, if Elena gets custody..." The entry ended there. Ivy's hands were numb. Elena hadn't just been cruel. She'd been paid to eliminate the problem before Ivy came of age, before the dormant power manifested and complicated someone's plans. The conspiracy ran deeper than simple cruelty, and her father had died knowing his daughter would be next. "You found it." Ivy jerked around. Theron stood in the doorway, shadows clinging to him like a second skin. "You knew." Her voice was ice. "You had this, and you didn't tell me." "I had suspicions. The journal confirmed them 2 days ago." He moved into the room, predatory grace, and crouched before her. "Your scent carried traces of wolf from the beginning. Dormant. But there, I thought I was imagining it. That the bond was making me sense things that weren't real." His jaw worked. "Then you almost shifted under the full moon. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were barely surviving the truth you already knew." His hand lifted, hesitated, then brushed hair from her face with a gentleness that made her chest ache. "And because I needed to be sure before I told you that you're not just Luna by bond. You're Luna by blood." The words detonated in her skull. Ivy stood, the journal falling forgotten, and her skin felt too tight, like something inside was trying to claw free. "No, I'm human. I've always been..." Her bones cracked. The pain was exquisite. Her spine arched, her hands curled into claws, and fur rippled along her forearms in patches before receding. Partial shift. Incomplete. Her body remembering what her mind refused to accept. Theron caught her before she fell, his arms steel bands around her shaking form. "Breathe. Focus on my voice. Your body doesn't know what it's doing yet. You have to guide it." "I can't. It hurts." "I know." His voice dropped to a rumble she felt in her bones. "I know, Ivy. But you're stronger than this. You survived your stepmother, survived the mountain, survived me." His breath was hot against her ear. "You can survive becoming what you were always meant to be." The shift reversed slowly, agonizingly, until Ivy was just herself again, human-shaped and gasping in Theron's arms. She looked up at him, at the scarred face she'd learned to read, at the carefully maintained distance that had defined every interaction between them. Except he wasn't distant now. He was holding her like she was precious, like she was his. Theron. He kissed her. Not the claiming ritual, not duty or bond or magical compulsion. Just him choosing her, his mouth urgent against hers, his hands cradling her face like she might shatter. The bond sang between them. But this was more than magic. This was want, raw and desperate and real. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. "I'm sorry," he breathed, "for all of it. For binding you without permission. For the danger you're in because of what you are." His voice cracked. "But I'm not sorry for keeping you alive. And I'm not sorry for this." Ivy's fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him back to her. "Then stop apologizing." They had 3 days of peace before the world came for them. 3 days where Ivy learned what it meant to be chosen instead of claimed, where Theron's carefully maintained walls crumbled under touches that spoke louder than words. 3 days where she practiced shifting, partial transformations that left her exhausted and exhilarated, while he watched with an intensity that made her skin burn. 3 days before Kira burst into the training yard, her human form streaked with snow and blood. "They're coming." The wolf's voice was ragged. 24, maybe more. Blackridge Pack. They'll be here by nightfall. Theron's expression went cold, tactical. "How did they find us?" "Does it matter?" Ash appeared behind Kira, already armed. "We need to fortify." But Ivy's blood had turned to ice, because she knew exactly how. "Elena." Theron's eyes snapped to hers. She saw him understand, saw rage flicker across his face before control slammed back into place. "She sold you twice." His voice was granite. "Once to die, once to make sure of it." The prophecy. Her father's journal had mentioned it only briefly. A Luna born of 2 worlds who would either unite the fractured packs or burn them all to ash. Those in power didn't want unity, didn't want change, wanted Ivy dead before she could become whatever threat the prophecy promised. "How many can we handle?" Ivy forced the words past numb lips. "Against 24 trained warriors?" Reed's laugh was bitter. "We die heroically." "No." Theron's command cracked through the courtyard. "We survive. Ivy, you stay in the manor's deep chambers. The wards there are strongest." "Absolutely not. This isn't negotiable." "You're right. It's not." Ivy stepped closer, and something in her eyes made him stop. "I'm not hiding while you die protecting me. I'm Luna, your mate. That means I fight. You can barely control a partial shift. Then I'll learn fast." The attack came with twilight. They poured over the mountain's edge like a black tide. Wolves larger than natural, moving with pack coordination that spoke of years fighting together. Blackridge warriors, their alpha's insignia burned into their right flanks. They came for blood, and they brought enough teeth to drown the mountain in it. Theron shifted first, his black wolf form massive and terrible, and Kira, Ash, and Reed flanked him. 4 against 24. Impossible odds made worse by the figure that stepped from the tree line in human form. A man whose presence made the air taste of copper and old violence. Theron the Exile. The Alpha's voice carried. "Still playing guardian to things that don't belong to you?" Theron's growl shook snow from the manor's eaves. "The girl dies tonight. The prophecy ends. You can walk away." The Alpha smiled, and it was all predator. "Elena sends her regards." They attacked. Ivy watched from the manor's entrance as Theron's pack met the wave, as violence erupted in snarls and snapping jaws and the wet sound of tearing flesh. She watched Kira go down under 3 wolves, watched Ash's leg bend wrong, watched Reed's throat open red, watched Theron fight like the world's ending, because for him, it was. The bond screamed in her chest. Her skin split and reformed, split again, her body trying to shift and failing, caught between forms as terror and rage built to a crescendo. They were losing. Her pack was dying. Theron was surrounded, bleeding from a dozen wounds, and the mate bond carried his pain like it was her own. A wolf broke through the line, headed straight for Ivy. She didn't think, didn't hesitate, just felt something ancient and furious tear free inside her chest. And this time when her bones cracked, they didn't stop halfway. The shift was agony and ecstasy, her body finally surrendering to what it had always been meant to become. But the wolf that emerged wasn't normal, wasn't even standard Luna. Power rolled off her in waves that made warriors stumble, made the Black Ridge Alpha's eyes go wide with something that looked like fear. Apex Luna, the rarest manifestation. Power that rivaled any alphas, that could command or destroy with equal ease. Ivy's wolf was silver-white and wreathed in energy that crackled like lightning. When she howled, the sound carried her rage, her grief, her refusal to watch anyone else she loved be taken from her. She tore into the enemy line like vengeance given form. Everything she'd buried, every year in the attic, every hunger pain, every moment of Elena's calculated cruelty, erupted in teeth and claws and power that made wolves twice her size bow or flee. She was fury incarnate, and she didn't stop until Theron's attackers were scattered or dead. She reached him as he collapsed, his black fur matted with blood, and shifted back to human without meaning to. Her hands pressed to his wounds, and she felt the bond pulling him down, dragging him toward death because he'd taken hits meant for her. No, Theron, stay with me. His amber eyes found hers, and she saw him trying to speak, to tell her to run, to save herself. Instead, Ivy made a choice. She pulled on the power thrumming in her veins, the Apex Luna energy that could heal or destroy, and poured it into the mate bond, flooded him with her life force the way he'd done for her on the mountain. The power blazed out from her in a pulse of silver light that lit up the mountainside, a beacon visible for miles. Every pack in the region would see it, would know what she was, would come. But Theron's eyes cleared. His wounds began to close, and Ivy held him while her declaration of war painted the sky. The silver light faded, leaving Ivy kneeling in blood-soaked snow with Theron's head cradled in her lap. Around them, the battlefield had gone silent. The Black Ridge wolves that remained, barely a dozen, stared at her with expressions caught between terror and awe. The Black Ridge Alpha was the first to move. He shifted to human form and dropped to one knee, his head bowed. Apex Luna! His voice carried across the courtyard. We yield. One by one, the others followed. Warriors who'd come to kill her now pressed their foreheads to frozen ground in submission, and Ivy understood with crystalline clarity. She'd just rewritten every hierarchy in the region. Power spoke louder than prophecy, and she'd just announced hers in a language no wolf could ignore. Theron stirred against her, his wounds closed to pink scars, his breathing steady. When his eyes opened, they found hers immediately. You shouldn't have done that. His voice was rough, but alive, so beautifully alive. Every pack within 50 miles saw that light. I know. Ivy's fingers trembled in his hair. I don't care. They'll come for you. Let them. She leaned down, pressed her forehead to his. I'm done running, done hiding, done being something people throw away. Theron's hand came up to cup her face, and his smile was fierce and proud, and edged with something that looked like wonder. My Luna. Your equal. Always. The weeks that followed were chaos carefully controlled. Word spread faster than wildfire. The strange Alpha's mate was Apex Luna, the prophecy made flesh, the girl who'd risen from death itself. Packs sent envoys, some bearing gifts of alliance, others bearing thinly veiled threats. Theron's fortress swelled with wolves seeking sanctuary or purpose, and Ivy learned to navigate politics as sharp as any blade, But some justice was simpler. Reed brought the news 3 weeks after the battle, shifting to human form with a newspaper clutched in his hand, and a vicious grin splitting his face. "Your stepmother." He offered Ivy the paper. "Thought you'd want to see." The headline read, "Local woman arrested for attempted murder." Elena's photograph stared out from the page, her expression perfectly composed even in a mugshot. The article detailed an anonymous tip leading police to evidence of drugging and conspiracy to commit murder. Elena would face human justice now. Years in a cell with no power, no comfort, no ability to hurt anyone ever again. Ivy stared at her stepmother's face and felt nothing but distant satisfaction. Elena had tried to erase her, had sold her death twice over. Now Elena would be forgotten in a human prison while Ivy stood as Luna to a growing pack. Some symmetry felt like poetry. "Did you—" Ivy looked at Theron, who was studying maps with Kira. He didn't look up. "I don't know what you're talking about." But his smirk said otherwise, and Ivy's heart did something complicated in her chest. The full moon rose on the night they'd chosen for the traditional bonding ceremony. Ivy stood in the courtyard wearing ceremonial leathers Kira had helped her into, watching wolves gather in a circle around the stone altar. Theron's pack had grown to 30, exiles and refugees and warriors drawn by the prophecy, or by loyalty, or by simple desire to belong to something greater. Theron approached from the manor, and Ivy's breath caught. He wore nothing but ritual markings painted across his scarred chest, alpha power radiating from him like heat, and his amber eyes found hers across the distance like coming home. They met at the altar as the moon reached its zenith. "We've done this backwards." Theron's voice carried to every witness. "I claimed her to save her life, bound her without permission, stole her choice." Ivy's heart hammered. They'd discussed this, planned it, but hearing him speak the words publicly still sent electricity down her spine. "Tonight, I ask what I should have asked on that mountain." He took her hands, and his were steady even though she could feel his pulse racing through the bond. "Ivy, Luna born of 2 worlds, will you have me? Not because of magic or fate or bonds already made, but because you choose this. Choose me." The courtyard held its breath. Ivy thought of the girl who'd been thrown away to die, thought of the stepmother who'd tried to erase her, the father who'd died protecting a secret, the prophecy that had painted targets on her back before she was born, thought of Theron finding her in the snow, of his hands gentle despite their scars, of the way he'd given her power instead of trying to control it. "I choose you." Her voice rang clear. "I choose this pack. I choose the storm that's coming and the battles we'll fight." She stepped closer until they were breathing the same air. "I choose all of it, Theron. Not because you saved me, but because you saw me when I was dying and decided I was worth the chaos." His kiss tasted like moonlight and promises, and when they broke apart, Ivy turned to face the gathered pack. Her pack now, truly and completely. "I was thrown away to die in the cold." Her voice carried to every wolf present. "My stepmother wanted me erased. The packs wanted me dead before I could become a threat." She let silver power shimmer across her skin, let them see what she was. But I survived. I became exactly what they feared. And now I stand Luna not because of prophecy, but because I chose to stop being a victim. The howl that rose from 30 throats shook the mountain. Later, standing at the manor's highest window with Theron's arms around her waist, Ivy watched more wolves gather in the valley below. Some would come to challenge, some to join, all drawn by the girl who'd died and come back something more. "Are you afraid?" Theron's breath was warm against her neck. Ivy thought of the attic, of hunger and cold and endless nights wondering if she'd see morning. Thought of the mountain pass and snow that had almost been her grave. No. She leaned back into his strength. "The cold tried to kill me once. It failed." She turned in his arms, met his amber eyes with her storm gray ones. I'm the storm now. Let them come. And in the valley below, the wolves kept gathering.